Continue with our analysis of various developments, not just in the country, but across the world. We want to begin in the United States of America. As you well know, it has been a tumultuous run to the elections, which were concluded. President-elect Joe Biden is set to take office a few hours from now, even as we anticipate the end of a Trump era. And I'd like to begin with a man who's leaving office, Donald J. Trump. And the statistics speak for itself. We've seen he's living with the lowest ratings of a president. We've also seen the economic turmoil in the United States of America, most definitely brought forth by the COVID-19. So it's tough work for Biden. But even as Trump leaves office, I beg to ask the question, Sakwa Bunyasi, I'll start with you, since it touches on politics. What exactly would you make of the Trump's presidency over the 4 years? It has had highs and lows. We've seen him go to Singapore, meet with the North Korean leader. What do you make of his leadership?
I think his leadership was an aberration. It was a type of leadership that is probably not mainstream in America. But America had swung to various extremes prior to him. When Donald Trump came in, he catered mostly for the corporate class from which he had come himself. A lot of the initiatives that he had, none of them was really near the voter. A lot of it was for corporate. So the argument that if the corporates are successful, employment will rise and they will be taken care of. That's a bit similar to trickle-down economics of the Reagan years. As it turned out, the U.S. people also, households are being pushed to the brink, and many households of various racial types, including the white households, were also feeling the economic pinch extremely seriously, and so they became susceptible to messages that were not mainstream. That, for example, the whites are now being disfavored because others are being favored. Immigration is bringing in people who are desperate and are pulling down our economic well-being. Extremely wrong, of course, because the economy has grown largely because of immigrant contributions to the economy. So he became a populist that has turned out perhaps to almost become a dangerous leader, as it were. But as you can see in the election, even though he lost clearly, that he had a significant number of followers behind him, who probably believed his perhaps economic, perhaps political philosophy. So it is, I think, something that is going with America for a while. The Republicans used to be a mainstream party, conservative in their views, whereas the Democrats were the ones for the downtrodden and so on. But now it's all getting mixed up with race and other issues, and so I think it'll take a while to sort it out.
All right, definitely take a while, and we'll continue monitoring. But even as we focus on the future, we have to reflect on the past. Manyasi, what do you make of the Trump presidency? But I'd like you to approach it from this particular angle. As Kenya, we had of comparisons what we saw in the capital to the third world countries. What exactly is happening? What can Kenya borrow from the exit of Donald Trump?
I think what probably we can learn the most is the importance of institutions that work. If Trump, for example, was in Africa, chances are that it will have gone the Museveni way or another president way, in the sense that probably election will have been forced, and probably even after he finishes the second term, maybe a constitution will have been changed so that he has another third term. I'm saying institutions that work because for them, the institutions will roll into place regardless of whether the person who is in office agrees or disagrees with the situation at hand. Whether you are aggrieved or not, you'll make your pronouncements, but ultimately the transitions will still happen anyway. And if you think about the way Trump has been having a change of tune in the recent past about the inauguration and all that, he has actually agreed and accepted the fact that there's nothing he can do and it's outside of his power and capacity to change anything in terms of his leaving office. But having said that, one of the things that is fundamental to me is that if you think through, for example, the fact that Trump was speaking a voice which no one else was willing to speak, that is the basis on which he was elected in his office as president. But what baffles me the most is that the fact that he actually got the number of votes that he got while he was running for re-election probably is more worrying for America today. And I'm saying more worrying because that is a very huge population to be believing in his ideologies. And therefore, in my view, even the confrontation that is going on right now around impeachments and around saying Trump must pay for this, Trump must be impeached, his ideologies and his ideas must be crushed. Remember, there's a very huge population that still believes in that same Trump. And therefore, the Biden administration, as it comes to office today, that is probably going to be the biggest headache because he will be ruling a population of almost 40% of Americans who have a very different view about what he thinks. And I can see, for example, he's already going for China and others, the foreign relations, the issues around war around the world. He's going to contradict exactly what Trump believed in. And Trump had those supporters who believed in exactly what he was speaking. And see, this is a man who came to office having spoken what people are not willing to speak about. And that, in my view, if you look at even the nomination process, people were saying, for example, the election of this man was a mistake. But for me, the way I was looking at it was, for him to have gone through the entire process of nomination to get to a point where he was elected, surely he was speaking for very many Americans who, and that's why even the media in the US was always getting it wrong, because they were asking people their opinion about what they thought about things. So they were not saying what they thought about things, but in what they believed in is what they voted through Trump. So if you think about it like that, then Biden has a lot of work to do in terms of bringing America together.
Exactly. It's a polarized nation, if I may use those words. But as we conclude on the president, the 45th president, Sakwa Bunyasi, what would you make of the Trump political model? Because as you mentioned, there were roughly over 70 million who voted for him, who believe not just in the man, but the ideologies he brought to that most powerful seat. What do you make of the Trump political model? And are there any similarities that you might pull from politicians right here in Kenya?
Jesse, one of the fundamental things in the U.S. Is a fear among the population that the non-white population, in some probably a decade from now, I don't know how many years exactly, could be slightly longer, will exceed the Caucasian population. And the fear is that the democratic model they have got, one man, one vote, might in fact lead to leadership changes in the U.S. that could be permanent, that might put the Caucasians at a disadvantage. So there is that balance. Now Trump comes in and exploits that fear that if you, the Caucasian, the white, remember he said about immigration, he has no problems with immigrants from Norway or Sweden, but he has problem with immigrants from the South and from Africa and from Asia. So he's exploiting the racial fears about the possible global, the macro imbalance in their population. So he comes in a fairly slanted way. And so getting those numbers from populations that feel that we, the white people now, are no longer at the forefront. Others have come in. And the others have come because they have higher education and so on. They are more ambitious in getting the basics. They have come from countries that are in trouble. And so the typical American who didn't do the basic jobs of dish cleaning and so on, like others do, may now be unemployed and is going to rely more and more on the state assistance. There's those fears. So Trump is saying, hey, you guys, wake up. These guys are going to overwhelm you. There are rapists and criminals and so on that are coming in. Let us get immigration from Eastern Europe and Russia and Latvia and so on. Those are okay. These others are not. It's a very dangerous model. The reality that we really must confront is that people are voting alongside those fears that they had, particularly the 70 million or so. Here, slightly less than almost 49% of those who did vote.
All right.
So you can see that the more fundamental concerns there. Is it a model we can borrow? I think we have also some fears about ethnic domination, and people begin reacting in anticipation, quietly in anticipation of the fact that we are going to be overwhelmed if we don't do this, if we don't do that, we are losing our advantage. We never have had an advantage. So these are issues that are complex, but I think we need different to approach it from different perspectives, political, sociological, and economic, and many others, perhaps even religious, you might say.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's a complex society they have there, and we have a miniature part of that complexity here.
Okay. Now, Alex Manyasi, looking forward, it is a difficult time for Joe Biden to take over the presidency. He's facing a situation that might be similar to the Great Depression in the 1930s, even as he sees to reverse many of Trump's policies. One of them, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, rejoining the World Health Organization, and this is just Wednesday. What would you make of the journey going forward? The economic turmoil facing the United States, they're also crippled with COVID-19, though there's hope with the vaccination, but it will be a tough time for Joe Biden as he takes over, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a tough time for him. His intention is to link America once again with the world, and the imagination is that he wants to have a say in what happens in the world, including the World Health Organization, the fact that the US was funding WHO, but now Trump actually withdrew that commitment. The issues around conservation it has been fundamental in the US for a long time, which Trump again did not believe that it was important for Americans. And the way Trump thought about America was he thought about it in terms of let's do our thing internally within the US and grow our country. Biden and others think that they need to influence the world, work with the world, and make sure that everything else they have a say in the global arena. So those are the two fundamental ways of looking at it. And for Trump, he believed, for example, that the people who are coming in, for instance, are coming to take your jobs, are coming to take over your country, because that is the biggest fear. And just to mention something that Americans today are not worried that Biden is taking up office. The people who support Trump, for example, and have the same ideologies with Trump, they're not even bothered about Biden. They're bothered about Harris as a deputy of Trump, because the imagination is that if something happened to Biden at some point along the way, then this is going to be the president of America. As a former prosecutor, as a woman of Asian descent, and as she's actually described as a very almost authoritarian kind of prosecutor when she was in office, a woman for that matter, if those Americans had a problem with Clinton, then you can imagine the type of problems they will have with Harris in office. So those are the issues that the Americans with the ideologies that Trump has have a problem with.
Well, it definitely be a paradigm shift even as Joe Biden takes office. Allow us to shift focus to local matters due to time constraints. And it's all touching on the Nairobi County, even as President Uhuru Kenyatta now wants his handshake partner Raila Odinga to actually put pen to paper and sign on their gentleman's agreement for the latter, the ODM party, to actually reap actual benefits. This came right after ODM claimed a stake to the Nairobi deputy governor's post. Now, they did cite that they had a role in the impeachment of Mike Mbuvi Sonko, justifying this claim. But this puts ODM leader Raila Odinga at a precarious position, catch-22, if you might call it that. I'll start with you, Bunyasi. What do you make of this briefly?
First of all, I would hope that our dialogue increasingly should be the roles of the political parties. We should say this is what Jubilee is doing, this is what ODM is doing, so that people judge events more by what those parties are doing. Now, for the moment, of course, the principals in those two parts are the president in his capacity as Jubilee boss, and also as president, and Raila as the ODM boss. I think it's going to be a difficult one, because I was going to say manipulated, but probably I should say administratively determined. And when you do those administrative determinations, you can't control all of the events going forward. If it doesn't go well, if it goes well, they will take credit. If it doesn't go well, they will blame each other and blame anybody else. So I think for much more Honorable Raila, going forward, for a person who wants to become president of this country, in 2 years, in less than 2 years' time, I think he would be worried that if things don't go well, how does it reflect on his party in the city?
All right.
So that must be a concern. And I think for the president too, if these things don't go well, will his side lose control of the city? I think it's going to be a worrisome thing. But because it's an administratively managed process, I think that they have to accept they are controlling the administration, but they're not controlling the political environment. They can't, really, at least not when we're heading towards an election.
All right.
So I think it is, yes, it is indeed a catch-22.
Okay, Alex Manyasi, your take on this, even as we appreciate the fact that perhaps political parties right here are led by interest, not the ideologies that lead the party.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about ideologies in Africa and whether political parties have ideologies, because you could have someone who is in the opposing camp and today they're in government and they think together with government, and yet they were thinking opposite of government yesterday. But having said that, two things I want to say. One is that the reason why the deputy governor position, if Kananu becomes governor, is important is that because Kananu, first of all, is not a seasoned politician, or she's not a politician. And therefore, if you're strategic, then whoever becomes deputy governor is likely to have a better chance of becoming governor in 2022. So that's one. So ODM looks at it from that point, in my view. And then number two, in terms of putting pen to paper, we have had instances where ODM has said that is government, that's Jubilee. So the mistake they have made, that is Jubilee mistakes.
All right.
But once you put pen to paper, then it will also mean that you're agreeing that every decision that we make, we are making that decision collectively.
Okay.
That is a tricky position to be for Raila Odinga at this point in time.
It definitely is tricky. We'll definitely take a look at how that develops, even as it's a binding agreement. Let's just see how it develops. Many thanks for your time, Bunyasi Sakwe, who's a Member of Parliament for Nambale, as well as Alex Manyasi, a governance and policy expert. We definitely have delved deeper into the papers and other pertinent issues arising. Let's take a short break right here on Morning Express. We'll be back with much more. Stay with us.